Question 22, a sequence is shown, -1, -7, -13, -19, -25, and so on. And it says, what is the function rule for this sequence? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into a table. So what they've done is they've given us the first 5 terms of the sequence. So the first term is -1, the second term is -7, the third term is -13, the fourth term is -19, and the fifth term is -25. So if I want to write a function rule, so the first thing is, remember, these are just written in function notation. So what I could do is I could rewrite this. So f of x is equal to -7x, -6x plus 5. I could just rewrite that y equals -6x plus 5. Remember, that means the same thing. This f of x is just another way to write your dependent variable. So I put everything in a table, and then what I'm going to do essentially is I'm going to find that first difference, which is our slope. Because if you notice, all of these equations are written in slope-intercept form. So slope-intercept form, remember, is y equals mx plus b. So first I'm going to try and find what the slope is. And slope, remember, is just a rate of change. How are the x's changing, and then how are the y's changing? So the x's I can see are pretty easy. The x's are changing, they're increasing by 1. So I would add 1 and I get the next term. And then I add 1 more and I get the next term. Add 1 and I get the next, right? So what I want to do is I want to see how are the y values changing to go from this first term to the second term, to go from the second term to the third term. And sometimes you can just tell. If you can't tell, remember, we would take y sub 2 and subtract y sub 1. So y sub 2 is right here. It's -7. So I'm going to take y sub 2, which is -7, and I'm going to subtract y sub 1, which is -1. So that's a subtraction problem, which I could rewrite as an addition problem. So that's -7 plus 1, which is equal to -6. So what I would do to this first term, I would take -1 and I would add to that a -6, and that would get me my second term. And then I would take -7 and I would add a -6 again, and that would get me -13. So that's my slope, or my constant change, is I'm adding a -6. So the slope of this line, because this would just be a line if I plotted these points, the slope of this line is -6. So in my 4 equations here, I'm looking for an equation that has a slope of -6. So that coefficient of the x value has to be -6. So I can eliminate a couple of them here. I can eliminate this one because this has a slope of 1. Remember, when there's no number in front of that x variable, it's really a coefficient of 1. So this does not have a slope of -6, and C also does not have a slope of -6. This has a slope of 5. So this is saying the rate of change is 5. So I know it's not that one either. So I've got it narrowed down to B and D, because both of those have a slope of -5. So the other thing I'm looking for is this y-intercept, essentially, right here. And there's no number here, so this really is like saying +0. I mean, I could write +0 here. That's really what the y-intercept is. So if I go back to my table, remember, when we find the y-intercept, we have to find an x-coordinate of 0, because the x-coordinate always has, the x-coordinate is always 0 on your y-intercept. I don't see 0 here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of add in another section of my table, and I'm going to put in a 0. So I'm just going to follow the pattern. You know, if I go backwards, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, if I go backwards, every single time if I go backwards, I'm actually, instead of adding a -6, I'm actually going to just add 6. So I would add 6 to get -19, add 6 to get -13, add 6, add 6, and if I added 6 again, this number would become a 5. So my y-intercept is really 5. If I graphed this, it would cross the y-axis at -5. So I can see that this has all the information I need. It has a rate of change, or a slope, of -6. And remember, that's how my y values were changing. I was adding a -6, adding a -6, adding a -6. So that's my slope, which gets multiplied by the independent variable x. And then my y-intercept is 5. And remember, to find the y-intercept, you always have to look for when x equals 0, what does y equal? And y equals 5. So I can eliminate this one as well. So for my answer here, the answer would be D. And again, remember, they just put this in function notation. So rather than putting a y here, they just put f of x is equal to, but I've got all the information I need here, negative 6x plus 5.